Hello everybody, I'm Ajit K. Mishra, your course instructor for Essential Life Skills. I'm here again with a new session on thinking skills. If you remember, in my last session I talked about the building blocks of thinking. In this session, I'll walk you through the world of some other important aspects of thinking. I'll start this session by talking about Bloom's taxonomy. You might have heard about Benjamin Bloom, who, with the help of his taxonomy of learning objectives, brought about a revolution to the world of learning and to the world of thinking as well. So, Bloom's taxonomy has been one of the most important reference points whenever it comes to thinking, learning, teaching, and doing a variety of intellectual activities. So, Bloom's taxonomy of learning objectives classifies a number of skills which can be used to teach thinking or even learn thinking, self-learning thinking. So, the taxonomy that was developed by Bloom in 1956 has a few very important components. It has been divided into two distinct parts: the lower order thinking skills, which includes remember, understand, and apply, and then the higher order thinking skills, which includes analyze, evaluate, and create. With the help of these lower order and higher order thinking skills, we can approach a problem, we can approach a situation in a much better manner. And that's the reason why Bloom's taxonomy is so very important. Let's take a look at the critical components of Bloom's taxonomy. The first critical component of the 1956 taxonomy given to us by Benjamin Bloom is knowledge, which involves the recall of specifics and universals, the recall of methods and processes, or the recall of a pattern, structure, or setting. That means knowledge is all about recalling all these things, the specifics, universals, methods, processes, patterns, structures, or settings. It leads to comprehension. That's the second level in Bloom's taxonomy. So that's comprehension, being in a position to understand things, the wholeness, and being in a position to make use of the things by making sense of them is what we mean by comprehension. The third is application. All these levels, all these thinking approaches are lower order thinking approaches. The third is application, which refers to the use of abstractions and their applications to concrete situations. So, whenever we apply abstractions to concrete situations to understand or make sense of the situation, we are actually doing that. We are actually applying our understanding, our knowledge to certain things so that we can make sense of those important things. That brings us to the higher order thinking skills, starting with analysis, which represents the breakdown of a communication into its constituent elements or parts, so that the relative hierarchy of ideas is made clear and the relations between ideas expressed are also made explicit. So, it's all about breaking down a communication into its constituent elements. It can be a piece of writing. If I ask you to analyze that piece of writing, you are going to break it down to its various components, especially the components of the communicated ideas or the communication. And then we are going to analyze each of these components. We are going to discover the patterns, the relations these components have among them. And then on the basis of that, we can present a proper analysis of that particular communication. The next is synthesis, which involves the putting together of elements and parts so as to form a whole. The next one is evaluation, which engenders judgment about the value of material and methods for a given purpose. It's very important that we determine the value of the material and methods that we use for a certain purpose or a given purpose. And the moment we are able to judge the value of this, we are doing evaluation. So these are the 6 very important components of Bloom's taxonomy. We can now take a look at the revised taxonomy, which is based on Bloom's taxonomy of 1956. The revised taxonomy came out in 2001, and it presents a different dimension to the whole thing. Through different methods and through different approaches, it talks about all these important things from a new dimension. Let's take a look at each of these dimensions. Let's start with the first dimension, that is remember. Remembering is all about being able to recalling facts and basic concepts. For example, it can be recalling in the form of a list, recalling in the form of duplicates. It may be about repeating, it may be about stating something. It's all about remembering. We all know how important remembering is, because learning something, thinking about something, knowing something is one aspect of it, but being able to remember or recall that particular experience, that particular learning is very, very important. So remember is the first important component of the revised taxonomy. The next one is understanding. That means I can explain ideas and concepts if I have understood it well. So for any proper thinking strategy to take place, it's important that we understand and we show how well we have understood by explaining ideas or concepts. So it can be describing, discussing, explaining, identifying, locating, recognizing, or even translating. So it's very important that we find ourselves in a position to explain ideas or concepts. The next level is apply. At this level, we learn how to use information in new situations. That means we have learned something on the basis of some serious thinking approaches. Now we have derived some approach from that particular experience, and we can apply that particular learning to different kinds of situations, in new situations or in absolutely unexpected situations. So it's all about using information in new situations where we can execute, implement, solve, use, demonstrate, interpret, schedule and sketch new information, or we can use information in new situations. So it is about applying, which is very, very important when it comes to the revised taxonomy. The next one is analyze, where we must find ourselves in a position to draw connections among ideas, discover patterns that underlie these ideas. So at this level, we must be in a position to differentiate, organize, relate, that is connecting the dots, and then compare, contrast, distinguish, examine, experiment, question, and test. So it's all about analyzing. If we can put to use all these things, then we can say we are analyzing, or you're using that particular approach. The next level is evaluate. At this level, we find ourselves in a position to justify our stand or decision on the basis of certain appraisals, arguments, defense, judgment, and support, value, maybe critiquing or weighing. So that is how we generally evaluate ideas or information to justify a stand or a decision. And then finally, we come to the last level, that is the create level, in which we produce new or original work. It is all about creating something new out of the information that we have gathered, that we can remember, we have understood, we can apply, we have analyzed or evaluated. Now we are in a position to create something absolutely new. So what we do, we produce new or original work. We can produce a new design, a new assemblage, construct a conjecture. We can also develop something new. We can formulate, we can investigate, we can author something absolutely new. That brings us to a very interesting aspect of it, especially the thinking approaches. There are a few thinking verbs that we need to be quite familiar with if we have to test how well we are doing as thinkers or good thinkers. The first type is remembering and recalling. So these are some of the verbs that we can make use of if we have to show that we are using that particular approach, remembering or recalling. For example, identifying, labeling, listing, matching, and then sequencing, reciting, bookmarking, counting are some of the important verbs that we require when it comes to remembering and recalling. Similarly, if we have to talk about understanding, the important verbs, thinking verbs, can be concluding, describing, discussing, paraphrasing, illustrating, interpreting, reporting, summarizing. All these verbs will show that we have understood something very, very well. The next type of verbs or thinking verbs are generally used to talk about applying skills. So applying skills will require verbs like apply, articulate, change, imitate, implement, download, produce, provide, even report, select, share. All these verbs are thinking verbs that we generally use when it comes to applying. And the next one is a set of thinking verbs that we generally use when it comes to show analyzing. Analyze, break down, characterize, classify, comparing, contrasting, deducing, differentiating, discriminating, distinguishing, examining, outlining. So all these verbs are associated with this particular thinking skill, that is analyzing. And then we come to the next important thinking skill, that is evaluating. And the thinking verbs include appraise, argue, assess, beta test, contrast, conclude, critique, or even criticize, decide, evaluate, predict, prove, rank, rate, support, review are some of the most important thinking verbs associated with the evaluating skill. And finally, these thinking verbs are associated with creating, the topmost level in the revised taxonomy. It is about adapting, animating, combining, composing, devising, formulating, integrating, organizing, performing, proposing, revising. All these verbs are thinking verbs. So these words tell that we are performing a certain action, a certain thinking action on the basis of this Bloom's taxonomy, either the 1956 taxonomy, the original taxonomy, or the 2001 revised taxonomy. So when that happens, it's very, very important that we understand the role, the importance of these thinking verbs for each of these stages in the taxonomy. So I'm sure you have taken note of these important things, and you're going to explore these things yet further, because these things will give us a very important foundation on the basis of which we can stretch our skills yet further. When I meet you the next time, I'll be talking about some more thinking skills. Until then, bye-bye.